Okay, hello, good morning. So today we move on to Dretschke's theory of representation in that article, misrepresentation. We'll give out the essay topics for the next essay on Friday, is the plan. That should give you a fair amount of time. It's almost a month, I think, till the second essay is due. Okay. But today and Wednesday, we'll look at Dretschke's misrepresentation. I want to begin, though, by just saying a bit more about where we got to last time. We have this picture. There are the objects out there in the world, and they impact on the mind over here. And that arrow, I guess, we interpret as a causal relation. You think there are thoughts going on in the mind. But then again, we want to say it's only because you've got the particular objects out there that you have the thoughts that you do. I mean, the objects constitute you having the thoughts that you do. Those objects being there is part of what makes it the case that you're having the particular thoughts that you are. So you might think, well, the object and what it causes have to be distinct existence. It'd have to be distinct existences, right? The cause is one thing and the effect is the other thing. Is that okay? Cause is one thing and effect is another. So something like this, you've got an object out there causing you to use a particular term, and it's when the object is causing you to use a particular term that you're having a thought about that thing. Yeah? So the thought depends on both the object and the term. So it's not right to think of the mind as over here and the objects as out there. The mind encompasses the objects. You get your mind around the objects. The mind is, as it were, ectoplasmic. You loop your mind around the things out there and encompass them in thought. That's plain enough. If you're looking at the sun and thinking about the sun, your mind is extending 93 million miles or whatever and encompassing the heavenly object. Yeah? Because the thought's in your mind and the object is a constituent of that thought. Therefore, your mind is bigger than you thought. That's all right? Plain as day? Okay. Well, if that's all right, there is a question how that makes sense. And one way of thinking of what I was saying last time about, I said you can have acquaintance with pains and so on, in that you know what the pain is like, and that's what fixes the reference of your term for pain. But you can be conscious of the qualitative character of things outside your mind. Right? You can be conscious of the qualitative character of the colours or the shapes or what people are like. So it can't be enough to say there's a causal connection, because the thing that's doing the cause is one thing and the thing that it's causing is another. I mean, if the mind's over here with all, with your brain and all that stuff, and the objects are out there, how can just the object causing a bit of your brain to do something be enough to bring the qualitative character of the object inside your mind? That seems like a kind of magic. You see what I mean? Anyone want to step up? Yes. That what I was suggesting last time is that you can be acquainted with the qualitative character, not just of your sensations, but of the colours and the properties of things out there in the world. Yeah? And that seems kind of intuitive. That's what the brain in the vat seems to be missing. It doesn't know anything about the qualitative character of its environment. Yeah? But how is that working if what we have is, on the one hand, the brain over here and the causes of what's going on in the brain out there, and they're just causing? How can that be providing you with knowledge of the qualitative character of what's going on out in the world? Well, let me try solving the problem, and maybe that will make it clearer what the problem is, if you see what I mean. The way, really, if you're fully explicit about it, the way I was thinking about it last time is that consciousness of an object is not a matter of having some glow generated in your brain by the object. It's a matter of a relation between you and the object. That's what G.E. Moore was saying. Consciousness of a colour is a relation that you stand into something external. So don't think of the mind as something confined to the head. Don't think of consciousness as something confined to the head. Think of the qualitative character of your experience as there's the world, there's a buzzing, blooming world of all the qualitative colours and shapes and smells and so on out there, waiting for you. And what you do is you just hook up to it by being conscious of it. And then your mind takes on board, literally takes on board some of that stuff out there. That's how you have knowledge of its qualitative character. Now, brains and causation are involved, but they're involved at a kind of subterranean level, that it's in virtue of that causal connect between the external thing out there and the brain in here that you're able to see the thing. But that's what consciousness is. And that's how consciousness can be giving you knowledge of what's out there in the world, what people, what characteristics there are. Okay, is that straightforward enough? Maybe you were all taking that for granted. Melissa? Straightforward enough?
Is that a glass tube?
That's like a glass tube. That's one of these...
like Searle's sensor.
That's right. That's one of these glass tubes that you can't actually see. If you see what I mean, you can't see the tube, you just see what's on the other end of it. Yeah.
It's ineffable like sense.
It's ineffable, that's right, like sense. Yeah, yeah. It's transparent like glass, right? Whenever you try it, that's that thing about if you try and focus on the character of your conscious experience itself, you always wind up just staring at the things around you. That's a quick way to see that this is true, actually. Suppose that consciousness was just something inside your mind, inside your head, then you should be able to just focus on it, right? So do that right now with your visual experience. Just think about the bit that's inside your... You see, you shut your eyes and you try and focus on the bit that's inside your head, but then you can't see a thing, right? So that you can't... I mean, there's no such thing as focusing on the bit inside your head. You can only focus on the external world. That should be telling you that what consciousness is a relation between you and the external world. Yep? Yep?
What about in cases of hallucination, for instance?
Yeah, cases of hallucination are really weird. Yeah, something different is going... Sorry?
Like you don't focus on the intentional object. Like the visual experience itself is.
That's right. No, that's very good. That's...
So, it doesn't require you to have some sort of external object. They have to focus.
Hallucination doesn't require for you to have some external object. Yeah. So a natural idea is that what's going on in ordinary experience is a kind of common factor between hallucination and seeing, right? But I think that's not the right way to think of it. Suppose that I'm visiting you in hospital, yeah? I don't mean you, I mean, you know, someone. and you're getting these hallucinations, right? So suppose you have some neurological suppose you've got some neurological condition, you're getting hallucinations. And you say to me, I say to you, what's it like? And you say, well, I can see a field with lots of children running across it. Yep. Now, in order to imagine what kind of experience you're having there, what do I do? I imagine a field, and then I imagine seeing the field. Yep. So what I do is I imagine seeing a field, and then I imagine being related to it. Yeah. So it's still relational. In the regular case, right now, if you say to me something like, what's that, like Melissa said just now, what's that thing there? Yeah. Then what I do is I look at the thing that you're looking at, and then I imagine how it seems from your point of view. You see what I mean? So in the ordinary case, you take the real world for granted as the kind of framework, and then you imagine other people's relations to it. In the hallucinatory case, you have to imagine a world, and then imagine other people's relations to it. So the hallucination case is actually more complicated than the ordinary case. There is a common factor, but it's a relation. It's a relation to the imagined world in the hallucinatory case and to the real world in the ordinary case. It's not that the common factor is a bit inside the head. Yep.
But if, for example, you wanted to really hold on to a sense state of view,
Sorry, can you do that louder?
if you really wanted to hold on to a sense state
Yeah,
of view,
if you wanted to hold on to a sense state of view,
could
yeah.
you say that it still was an external object thing that was a thing really was existing in the case of hallucination that was giving you the
Yeah, if you hold the sense state of view, you'll say there's the same thing going on in the case of hallucination as in the case of ordinary seeing, namely the sense datum. Yeah, but people do talk about sense data the whole time, or they talk about its modern counterparts. They talk about qualia or something like that. But my point is that in those cases, people literally have no idea what they're talking about. Because if you say, what do you mean, qualia? You say, oh, this bit in here. This bit in here, all I get is a whole bunch of people. Yeah, that's not qualia. And then you tell, oh, yes, well, what do? You kind of squint sideways or something. But I just could never do the squint. You see what I mean? I never get the sense data. I have the same thing as Moore. I only get the stuff out there. Yeah. That's like that elusiveness of sense that we talked about right from the start. Yeah. People think they know what they're talking about when they talk about qualia. And how many of you have heard the term qualia? So, yeah. See, it sounds like a kind of technical philosophical term, and you think, isn't that great? Now we've got a proper theory about something. But then you're told, well, you don't need any theory of it. That's what's so wonderful about qualia. Everybody has qualia. They're the first and most obvious things you encounter in life. But of course they're not. The first and most obvious things you encounter in life are other people and tables and chairs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah? That's what I mean. You literally have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about the stuff inside the head. There is no such thing. The consciousness is a relation between you and the environment. And that's how it can be fixed. It can be providing you with knowledge of what you're talking about. Plain enough? Put your hand up if that's plain enough. Very good.
I have a question. Can you explain again why you think the common factor is not what's in the head?
Why the common factor is not what's in the head? Well, I think talking about hallucinations is really difficult. I mean, understanding what's going on with hallucinations is really difficult. And the way we do it, the way we understand what's going on when someone says they have a hallucination is you imagine the environment that they're describing, and then you imagine them being related to that environment.
You imagine that hallucinating it?
You imagine them seeing it, this imaginary environment. Do you see what I mean? You tell a story to yourself. Oh, there's a field with children running across it. Yeah?
But I thought when we were comparing the common factor between hallucination and a real perception, we were talking about the person instead of someone else perceiving the hallucinator. So, like, the difference between me hallucinating as I see a few
Yes,
children
yes.
and the difference between me actually seeing a
Yeah.
few children, isn't there a common factor that's what's going on in my head? Not mental image, but what's going on in my head?
What's going on in your head? Yeah.
Factor between the hallucination and the actual.
What's certainly going on in your head that really is a common factor is a lot of brain stuff. There might be brain stuff going on that's pretty much the same. Yeah. But if we're talking about the conscious experience, then the only way we have of getting onto what someone's got when they've got a conscious experience, and if you're trying to think about my conscious experiences, or if I'm trying to think about yours, your visual experiences, the only way I have of doing it is by imagining. There's no other access to consciousness than by imagining it. That's all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then the thing about a common factor is, what's in common between the imaginative exercise in the case where someone's really seeing it and the case where they're only having a hallucination? And I say in both cases what's going on is a relation. In the real case, I'm imagining how this thing, this actual thing, seems to you, how you're seeing it. In the hallucinatory case, I imagine the environment you described to me, and then I imagine you seeing that. That's a really fancy kind of exercise.
I don't really understand why you have to posit a third person imagining me hallucinating. I thought we were just talking. But I don't know if they have time to talk about it. So you can go on.
No, carry on. This is really good. What do you think, guys? Shall we take one more round?
I think you're trying to say the common factor between hallucination and perception is that it's not the thing going on in my head. As I was saying, so between me hallucinating and you seeing a few children. But then you kept positing a third person. So if I have to imagine you
That's right.
hallucinating, and I don't understand why you have to do that.
Okay, well, if you, I'm putting it in terms of a third person because I think it helps get clear about the structure of what's going on. But if you just think of it first personally, like I'm having a hallucination, okay, then what do? Do I say, okay, suppose I'm having a hallucination. All these people are looking at me. What's going on, right? Who are these people? And I try to describe my hallucination to you, yeah? Then what do? Do I say, here are some blobs of sense data. This is what I'm getting, some blobs of sense data. I don't do that. I say, there's a whole stack of people. I describe an environment to you, right? When I'm trying to describe what's going on in my head, the only way I have of doing it is by describing what's out there. And then saying, and I'm seeing all that. Yeah? So I still have the same structure to my description of what's going on in my head. Yeah? That didn't bring in a third person, but it brings out that the only common thing here is a relation. In the one case, it's a relation to the actual environment. In the other case, it's a relation to an imaginary environment.
I thought what makes the hallucination a hallucination of a real perception is that they have something in common, right? And that thing in common is what's going on in my head. That's just a really intuitive way to put it, I guess.
A hallucination of a real perception.
Yeah, so when I say, oh my gosh, I'm hallucinating, I see all these people staring at
Yeah.
me. And what makes this, I'm hallucinating,
Yeah.
these people staring at me is that I've had a similar situation before.
Yeah.
And it resembles, and what's going on in my head right now resembles what happened before. And
Right.
that's why, that's the common
Yeah.
thing.
Okay, I agree you can think about it like that, and I actually agree most philosophers do think about it like that, which is why that's great what you're raising, yeah, because of what most of my colleagues would say. But what I wish to point out to you and the rest of them, is, the whole lot of them, is that if you think about how people actually describe what's going on with their hallucinations, they don't talk about what's in my head. They say, I'm seeing things, I'm hearing voices. You see what I mean? They describe an external environment and they describe the relation to it. Nobody who's actually really, in fact, trying to describe a hallucination talks about what's going on in the head. They talk about what's going on out there and what they're seeing or hearing. We use seeing or hearing as something you can't do unless the thing is there. You see what I mean? But people always talk about seeing things or hearing voices or whatever it is, yeah? It's just that the things are imaginary. Yeah? 1, 2.
But what gives the authority to actually presuppose that the third person is not part of that possible state?
Sorry, the third person?
Yeah, like the third person is not part of that, you know.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's what
We have to
the
assume that there's some sort of public language that allows me to understand exactly what you're saying. But that doesn't
That's right.
necessarily satisfy that the third person is not part of the hallucination.
I think that's true. I think that's just true.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. I understand there's a third thing, maybe, like the thing you're seeing. But who's the third person? If I'm hallucinating a tree, then there's...
No,
Uh,
because I kept using an example like, oh, you're sick, you're in the hospital, and I'm gonna imagine you hallucinating. That's the third person.
Okay, that's fair enough. Other people are just catching up with you. That's, the way I was putting it was in terms of what kind of imaginative exercise do you have to do to find out about the other person's conscious experience. Yeah? And I was saying in both the hallucinatory case or the ordinary case of seeing, it involves a relation. Yeah? But the question was, why are we thinking of this in terms of the imaginative exercise that a third person has to carry out at all? Yeah. Yeah, and then I shifted to putting it in terms of what the person themselves says.
Yeah,
And that was meant to address your question. If I'm describing my hallucination, I don't just say, I'm having blobs of sense data. I say, there's a whole room of people there, and I'm seeing them all. You see what I mean? I myself do it in terms of a relation.
I understood that part.
Okay. Right. Okay, come back to, yeah.
I guess I just feel like what someone would report when having a hallucination would be closer to saying something in terms of sense data than, there are trees around me, if I were hallucinating, I were telling somebody, like, I see colors and I see a tree, I feel like that, in regarding that it's not actually there, that's probably closer to saying that saying that I have some certain, I'm seeing some, or that I'm seeing some sort of sense data, or that I'm like that there's some sense.
That's right. You don't say. I mean, you're saying you don't say you're seeing some sense data. You say you're seeing a tree.
I'm saying that when I say, oh, I'm seeing colors on a tree, that to me is intuitively closer to saying that I see sense data than there is a tree.
Okay, but yeah, well, I don't actually see that. If I say I'm seeing a tree, yeah, the tree's got to be there. You can't see a tree if there's no tree there.
I mean, if I'm hallucinating and I'm aware that I'm hallucinating,
Yeah.
then I certainly feel like I'm seeing. Okay, I see what you mean. Like, as if, are we like speaking in terms of this causal theory of reference that there actually has to be a tree there for me to refer to it?
Yeah, I mean something a little bit simpler. That in order to, the way we use English, in order to see something, the thing has to be there.
I disagree. Like, if I were hallucinating a tree,
Yeah. You describe it as if there were a tree there and you were seeing it. That's right. That's what I mean.
What? My experience?
Sorry?
Describe what?
You describe your hallucination. You'd use this language of there's a tree there and I'm seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah. You use that fully factive language. That's just the way we talk. We talk about hearing voices. How can you be hearing a voice if there wasn't a voice there? Well, what you do is you have this fantasy. You have this imaginative exercise. A voice is there, and I'm hearing it. And that's the only way you have of describing what's going on. We're always thinking in terms of a relation to something out there. Only sometimes it's imaginary, the thing out there. Yep.
But I feel like you can't have it both ways, right? You're either seeing trees or you're in a relation to the thing that you're seeing. Because if you can hallucinate, I can have exactly the same perceptual experience, whether there's a tree there or not. Then if the tree's not there, then what am I in relation to that's giving me this?
That's right. Well, it's an implication of what I'm saying that we can't take your report fully seriously, right? I'm just playing back what I think is the way we talk in ordinary English.
But so
Yeah.
is it related to you still when it's saying the case where I'm describing a tree, but there's no tree there?
It's a relation to something imaginary. It's a relation to something imaginary. If you say, but can that be literally true? That you could really be related? How can you be really be? It doesn't make any sense. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, well,
It either is there or it's not. Yeah.
It is this imaginary thing that
That's right. No, I agree. And that's to say, I think we can't take these reports. It's very hard to see how these reports can be literally true. Yeah. This is like the problem of negative existentials. How can it literally be true that there's no such thing as Santa Claus if, in order to know what Santa Claus is, you have to assume that there's such a thing as Santa Claus? You see what I mean? This is just the same problem. So I think that's a real and general problem. All I'm doing is playing back the way we ordinarily talk. What does not seem to be a correct description of anything is something about I'm having a whole bunch of sense data. That just comes from out of the blue, that idea as a way of describing the literal truth here. It doesn't describe any literal truth. First of all, you don't know what you're talking about because, what are these sense data? And anyway, it's not catching the full force of what we incompetently try to say ordinarily by saying, I'm hearing voices.
Sure, but I think it's just a device to try to hold into this sense that we are losing.
That's right, it is. Because otherwise we have no idea how to describe what's going on. And I think that's correct. That's right. It's intuitively motivated, but there is a puzzle as to how it can be literally correct. That's right. But so far as I can see, that's what ordinary English has to offer. These are our ordinary colloquial resources, and I don't see that there's any better resource to describe what's going on. Yeah. Okay, last of this, then we really should move on to Dretzka. Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, so, from what I understand, you're saying that there's an ambiguity in the word.
Sorry, should I shut this? Should I shut this?
I don't think I can put it on.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So, this is right. You're saying that there's an ambiguity in the terms like see and hear.
Not exactly. I think we use them unambiguously, but sometimes we do an imaginative I mean, like if I'm telling you a story, if I say Sherlock Holmes put out his pipe and looked straight at his visitor, yeah, then I'm using look in just the ordinary sense, but I'm using it in relation to two imaginary characters, Sherlock Holmes and his visitor, yeah? So I think something like that is what's going on with hallucination. We're using the term see in its usual sense, or if I say I'm hearing voices, I'm using the term hear in its usual sense, but the thing in the other end of the chain is something imaginary, yeah? And as the last questioner said, there's a problem then how that can be literally true, yeah? And I just think that this is a genuinely puzzling area, but that's as far as colloquial English takes us. Yeah. Yep.
So, in a case of a person hallucinating, but the person believes that he is hallucinating, such as say.
Yeah, the person believes he's hallucinating. Sure.
I'm seeing a tree, but
Yeah.
I know this is a hallucination.
Yeah.
Then in that case, the person is strongly believing that the other cause that makes him believe that this is a hallucination
Yes.
is more credible than the seeing tree.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, surely that can happen. Yeah.
that's-
If I say to you, I'm getting the voices again, then I can know perfectly well that those are those imaginary voices. Yeah.
And that's like phenomenally same as really seeing a tree but believing that there is no tree but it's imagining the tree.
There is a similarity, yes. Okay. Yep. Last one, and then we really should move on.
So this imaginary thing, in which I stand in relation to, isn't that just a mental thing? Like, isn't that just sense data or something like that?
Yeah. No. I mean, take a real case. I suddenly seem to see my mother sitting in the room. Right? Are you saying that's my mother you're talking about? That's not some bunch of sense data. I'm not having a hallucination of anything less than my mother. Don't you say my mother's just a bunch of sense data? You see what I mean? I'm having a hallucination of something literally flesh and blood. It wouldn't be the same hallucination if it was just a whole bunch of sense data I was getting.
Okay, but what is it that I stand in relation to if I'm hallucinating my mother?
Well, it's got to be your mother.
Oh, it's her, not some imaginary version of her or something.
Yeah, but she can't be really here, can she? Yeah. But you don't want to say that someone's here, but it's not your mother. Okay, I really want to get onto the Dretschke, but let's come back to this. I find this extremely interesting and could spend many happy hours in this. So shall we come back to this sometime? Sure. Okay. Let's just move on to Dretschke. So this is a different part of the forest. And next time I'll try and say something about what Dretschke's picture is, take is on causation and sensory experience, which is very different. But Dretschke starts out with a model for how to think about meaning and representation that at first sight is really counterintuitive. He starts out with things like measuring instruments and so on, and you'd naturally think, how is that going to give you a good model for language or for mental representation generally? Because these are so obviously artifacts of language. And the original problem we had right back in the first week was something like, what's a language? Well, a language has sentences in it. Sentences are capable of being true or false. Sentences are made out of words. So you get sentences by putting words together in lots of different ways. There's something combinatorial about it. And the meaning of a statement is something like the condition it has to hold for a sentence to be true. And if you say something true, you got it right. If you say something false, you got it wrong. So there's right and wrong with sentences. That's all right. This is meant to be reasonably uncontroversial. Now, here's another thing that I think is reasonably uncontroversial. Most of the physical world isn't governed by standards of correctness. If you're looking at a molecule, you can't really say the atoms here are put together very badly, or something like that. You see what I mean? It doesn't make sense to talk about the planets going right or wrong in going around their orbits. There goes Mercury. You can't say Mercury's deviating from its Mercury never. Mercury gets a ticket. That makes no sense, right? So how does it happen that there are standards of rightness and wrongness in the first place? That's a really fundamental question about representation. And once you take it for granted we've got a language, then it's very easy to say, well, I can lay down what the parking regulations are for the campus, or I can lay down what the rules are for what you can take into this ball game or something. And if you take it for granted that you're capable of thinking, then you could lay down rules for language. People very often describe language in those terms. But first of all, thinking seems to presuppose an understanding of language. I mean, most complex thinking is something that's only made possible by the fact that you understand language. And if you ask, can a dog think that its master will be home in 3 weeks from tomorrow? Why not? Well, the natural answer is because it doesn't have language, right? It's language that allows us to think that. But anyhow, even if there could be thought without language, that question, how can there be standards of right or wrong for thinking, is just as puzzling as the question about language. So the problem, and this is the problem Dretske is addressing, is to explain where the standards of rightness or wrongness for language come from. Okay, where it all starts, where you first make the shift from the planets or the molecules to there being any standards of rightness or wrongness at all, how it can be that there's a possibility of misrepresentation. Okay, we've touched on this before. Is that reasonably plain, what the basic problem is here that Dretske is going to address? Yep. Okay, and here's, I mean, there's something really beautiful and simple about what Dretske does here. Here's where he starts, and it's just, I think, a very original starting point. He says there's a kind of meaning that you get for systems of components of systems that are functions. So consider the petrol gauge in a car. Petrol gauge in a car? Yep. So the position of a fuel gauge, if you've got the needle going over to the right, that means that the tank is full. You can say the petrol gauge is the needle is representing how much fuel is in the tank. If you put it over to the right, it means that the tank is full. So you've got a kind of representation and meaning here. Yep. So you can say, you can define functional meaning by saying the needle being over to the right means that the tank is full. That says the same thing as the function of the tank is, the function of the needle is to indicate the function of the, sorry, let me do that again. The function of the needle is to indicate the condition of the tank, and the needle does this in part by indicating that the tank is full by being over to the right. Yeah, so that just generalizes it. Right, you can do that. You can explain meaning in terms of function and indication. Yeah? So all we need to know now is what do indication and function mean? Well, indicate just means smoke indicates fire, right? That's kind of intuitive. The needle indicates the condition of the tank. That's to say, if there's smoke, there's fire. So you can read off the presence of fire from the smoke. Yeah? So one thing indicating another just means if you got the first thing, then you got the second thing. And that might be because the second thing is usually what causes the first thing. The fire is usually what causes the smoke. The petrol tank being full is usually what causes the gauge to be over to the right. So you've got a causal correlation between two things. If this thing varies with this thing, then this thing is indicating what's going on with that thing. Right? You can read off what's going on with this thing by looking at this thing. Yep. Yep.
Doesn't that presuppose a perfect regularity?
It doesn't presuppose a perfect regularity. I mean, smoke might not be a perfect indicator of fire. People might set off smoke bombs sometimes, yeah. But by and large, it's a good indicator of fire, yeah. I mean, when people talk about indicators in the economy, things are looking good. They don't mean it's 100% certain that it's going to go well. Just mean the indicators are good, yeah. You don't need perfection here, thankfully. Yep, yep.
I guess it's highly improbable.
Yeah, I'd settle for more probable. Dretske isn't fully explicit about this, but I think Dretske would probably settle for more probable than not. Yeah, some kind of correlation anyhow. Yeah. Okay, so function. What about function? Well, the function of the fuel gauge is to indicate the level of petrol in the tank. This is uncontroversial. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we gave that function to the gauge, right? When people were making when people make cars, they say, here's a wheeze, let's put in something that will do that, indicate how much petrol there is in the tank, right? So people deliberately made that with the intention of putting in something that would indicate how much petrol you got. You could have used that very same instrument for something different. If the height of the petrol in the tank had some intrinsic interest for drivers, then you might put in something that would monitor the height. And it might be the very same thing. But actually what it's for is who cares about the height, right? All you care about is absolutely how much petrol there is. So that's the function of the gauge. Okay, so now we've got a definition of meaning. D's being G means that W is F. If D's function is to indicate D's function is to indicate the condition of W, and it performs that function by indicating that W is F by being G. So the needle being over to the right means that the tank is full. So now we've got a definition of this meaning. The function of the needle is to indicate the condition of the tank, and it performs that function in part by indicating that the tank is full. That is, it's causally responsive to the fullness of the tank by being over to the right. So the tank being full causes the needle to go over to the right. And then you can just read that off. And that's why it's there. That's its function. Yep. Okay, now suppose that the only function that we've got here are these assigned functions, functions that the guys in the factory or the designers of the car had for putting the gauge in. Then meaning is tainted, this is Dretschke, meaning is tainted with the purposes, intentions, and beliefs of those who assign the function from which meaning derives its functional meaning derives its misrepresentational powers. So all we're getting out really is the meaning we put in. We just defined the meaning in terms of function and indication. But now it turns out that this notion of function, indication seems all right. Indication is kind of clean, but function is really problematic because it presupposes thinking. It presupposes even some kind of language on the part of the people who gave the thing its function. You see the problem? Yeah, we were trying to find the source of rightness and wrongness, and we haven't done it. So this is Dretschke. We shall not have cracked meaning insofar as this involves the power of misrepresentation to its original source. We merely worked our way back somewhat indirectly to our own mysterious capacity for representation or misrepresentation. So that was a problem, to explain the original source of standards of rightness or wrong for representations. Okay, and so far we've made no progress whatever. All right, is that fair enough? Yeah. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. Any questions about that? You see the loop there. You can explain functional meaning in terms of indication and function, but then what's this function, right? Now watch me very closely here. Here's a famous example of Dretschke's. Marine bacteria, so I'm told, need oxygen-free water to survive, right? So they're not interested in oxygen. They like water without oxygen, yeah? And so they've got internal magnets. This is the kind of thing. This is one of these bacteria, and this thing in here is called a magnetosome, and it is magnetically sensitive, yeah? So it works like a compass. So what it does is it tells the bacterium where magnetic north is. Yeah. Now, if you were a bacterium, just suppose for a moment, suppose you were a bacterium. Why would you like to know where magnetic north is? Sorry? Who said that? Because you want to get to warmer climates. Well, apparently, actually, oxygen-free water is towards the magnetic north, right? So they get deeper water towards magnetic north. These particular magnetosomes, anyhow, and that's actually the reason. Yeah, it could have been the thing you said. Maybe that helps too. Yeah, if they go on vacation or something. Yeah. But if a bacterium is wanting to get to oxygen-free water and stay away from oxygenated water, then the compass is really handy, right? So the compass is like a gauge. The compass is kind of like an internal petrol gauge, if you see what I mean. It's got this little needle there that is telling it where to go for oxygen-free water. The magnetosome has the function of indicating the direction of oxygen-free water. So you can use that same formula. The magnetosome pointing to 12 o'clock means that oxygen-free water is at 12 o'clock. You see what I mean? Yes. Go straight ahead for the oxygen-free water. So we can use that definition of functional meaning here. But function is being explained. Is function being explained in terms of what the designer of the bacterium wanted? No, there was no designer, right? Bacteria are not made in factories, right? Right? So nobody intentionally put the thing in. So there's no taint here of purposes or intentions in putting the magnetosome in, putting the magnetosome into the bacterium. So we're not presupposing anything about intentions or plans or purposes. It's just that this thing needs oxygen-free water, and otherwise it'll die. And the magnetosome pointing this way or that to indicate where the oxygen-free water, that's how it meets that need. So if you want to put this to the test, I mean, suppose you have a scientist with a whole bunch of bacteria in a tank, right? And then you hold a magnet over the bacterium, yeah? And you lure the bacterium to its death. You can say, ha ha, fooled you, yeah? You thought the oxygen-free water was over here. You see what I mean? You made a big mistake. I mean, you can try this at home. Yeah? Fool the bacterium. But if you manage to fool the bacterium, that means it got it wrong. Yeah? So there's such a thing as a bacterium getting it right or wrong. If you hold a magnet near bacteria, you can lure them into oxygenated surface water. So what you did was you produced a representation. Yep.
Isn't there a further distinction that's to be made between natural meanings and meanings that we that's derived from our conception of it? So
Yeah.
in the bacteria case is natural for us to find the indication that's not tainted with purpose or intention, but in things like green light, it's tainted with our purpose of, having a color that indicates
A green light. Oh, you mean like a traffic light? Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. So a traffic light, if you say green light means go, that really has to do with our purposes and intentions. But with the bacterium, that seems more like natural meaning. Am I using your term correctly? Yeah. That seems more like natural meaning because it doesn't have anything to do with our intentions or purposes. And it doesn't have anything to do with the bacterium's intentions or purposes. It has to do with what the bacterium needs, whether it knows it or not. That's why that thing got put there. Yep.
But it seems to me that the bacteria itself obviously hasn't got any language.
Sorry?
The bacterium itself hasn't got a language. So it's not right or wrong in terms of the bacteria. It's not the bacterium that's right or wrong. We have a theory that we make about evolution, and then that produces standards of rightness or wrongness because you can compare the fitness of animals, and then we can assign a function to the bacteria's magnetoscope thing.
Yeah.
And
Magnetosome.
That's
Yeah.
an assigned function by us to define right or wrongness in terms of an evolutionary theory. The bacterium hasn't got it wrong by following the magnet. That's just what happens. If it dies or not, that's not anything to do with the bacterium.
Yeah.
It's to do with us imposing right or wrongness in terms of survival upon it.
That's really an interesting take. But is evolution really something that we create? Isn't it something we find out about?
Well, it's a sort of language that we come up with that may be useful for our purposes, but those are our defined goals. That's nothing to do with the goals of the bacterium. We can't say anything about whether the bacterium actually wants to live or not, or whether it thinks that's...
Strongly agree, but it didn't say what it wants, it said what it needs.
Or even, well, you say, well, what it needs, well, I mean, that's again, I think that's still imposing language upon it. I mean, you say the bacteria needs to live, by what standards? By your own standards.
So there's somebody behind you wanting to come in this.
I
Yeah.
think there's a simpler argument you can make without the evolution part of it,
Uh-huh.
saying that, okay, so bacteria, you didn't claim that bacteria got it wrong.
Yes, that's right.
You just need to claim that, no, our function is wrong, but maybe the bacteria is not drawn to the oxygen-free water, but instead just drawn to magnet.
It's drawn to magnets.
drawn to magnets. So whatever magnetic fields that exist within the water,
Yep.
we're drawn to, but when we put our own magnetic fields, it's drawn to magnets.
Yeah.
Our function is wrong. We didn't accurately describe what the bacteria do.
But is that really right? What I was doing, I mean, what I'm, let me just hold the line for against both of you, right? I was putting in terms of need, right? So does the bacterium need magnets or does it need oxygen-free water? Surely it's got to be the water. That's the thing it needs. And I don't really buy that evolution is just our language, if you see what I mean. That makes it sound like animals don't really evolve. We just like to describe them as if they're evolving. That's not the right picture, surely. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there are any intelligent design guys here, but setting that aside, you think, look, what we discovered is that organisms have needs. They have aspects of their makeup that are adapted to those needs, that allow them to adapt themselves to what the environment will provide them. Yeah, we talk the whole time about what's the heart for? It's for pumping blood. That's not because we thought it was for pumping blood or we'd like it to pump blood. That's just the need we have for it to do this or that.
Well, I agree. It's a really useful way of talking about things, but I don't think that presupposes that that's actually the way things are. I think you're right that the reason we use evolution as a language, I do think it's a language, but the reason we use it as a language is because it's an incredibly useful one to phrase things.
Yeah, but the reason it's so useful might be that it's true.
Well, it might not be though at all. It doesn't have to be true. It's just we wouldn't talk about it unless it was useful.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something that anyone bothered to discuss. So there's a selection bias that goes on. But that doesn't actually mean that there's anything that the bacterium itself outside of people needs. It's still something phrased in terms of a language that's a human construct.
Well, it seems to me we talk about the needs of animals the whole time. Well, time's running out, but I really want to hear what people are saying. So can you give us a soundbite? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say you can imagine any system that if you were to remove part of that system, the system would collapse.
Right.
And so you can imagine the bacteria being a system, or you can imagine something really arbitrary, of just certain things orbiting around each other in a certain
Right.
way. And so that would be like my kind of argument to show that like evolution is really, like you can't say that there's functions in things, like this thing needs something, because any system, you can describe anything as being a system and say that it would collapse if we remove one certain part of it.
Right. But suppose that the reason the thing is there is that if it weren't there, the system would collapse. You see what I mean? That's what happens with these things. The reason they're selected for is that without them, the thing dies.
Yeah, but
Yeah, they're
describe
adaptive.
anything
Yeah.
as being a system and having some sort of thing that it needs.
Well, no. I mean, if you just take a building, for example, so sure, some parts of it might have been put there deliberately. Other parts might just be there, but just luckily enough holding the thing up. Yeah. But that would be to say they're not there because they hold the thing up. You see what I mean? It's much more intuitive to say if something is there because it allows the organism to meet that need, then that's its function. The reason for the thing's existence is that it allows the organism to meet that need. Last one, and then I wish to make a couple of remarks, and then we'll stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a different word. I accept the whole need to,
Yeah.
but aren't we deriving ought from the base?
Very good. Yeah, that's the crispest way of putting this general line of skepticism. Aren't we deriving an ought from an is? Yeah. Yeah. That is really a key question. That is really the key question. Yeah. But all I want to say is, when you're thinking about what goes on, not just with bacteria, but with the human body, with lots of our brain systems and so on generally, that's exactly the way we talk the whole time, as if evolution is allowing us to derive an ought from an is. That you ask, what is this perceptual mechanism for? Well, it's for color vision, it's for edge detection, it's for detecting motion, right? Vision scientists, for example, talk about human perception in exactly the same way I've just been talking about the magnetosome. That's how there can be visual illusions, because this system is to allow you to detect motion, and there wasn't really any motion there. You see what I mean? So let's stop midway there, and we'll come back to this on Wednesday. We'll come back to exactly this. Okay, thanks, guys.